All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to have Kelly Brown here. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Melissa Foyer. I am a career coach for the Trachtenberg School. Met many of you already. I'm not even going to attempt to introduce Kelly because she's got so much in her background that I'm going to let her do it. And that is kind of the point of this session is to talk about non-linear and interesting kinds of moves and how to navigate all that. So, Kelly, I'm going to go ahead and throw this over to you.
Awesome. Hello, everyone, and thank you to Trachtenberg and Denise and Melissa for giving me the opportunity. It's great to be connected with my alma mater, who I'm deeply connected with in many ways, like lifelong friends from the 2 years that I was there. But this is neat, especially in my at my point in my career, to kind of go back and think about how to convey what my choices have been and where they've led me. And hopefully you all derive some value out of this. Defer to Melissa or the group, but like happy to just have a conversation too. I don't need to talk at you. So if we want to raise hands, you want to jump in, ask questions. If you want to take it a different direction, that's great. Like this is about you. It's not really about me or Melissa. So with that, and Melissa, if I would ask you to just pull up slides. My short stint at Merck, which you'll see, the pharmaceutical company taught me to do slide decks for everything, which is not something I did at OMB or at in the Senate really at all. So I went ahead and just put together a deck so you weren't looking at my face. So welcome. I think Denise asked me to come and talk a little bit. I think I'll talk for a short amount of this time and then we can do questions or to see how it flows. But to talk about my path, which really hasn't been linear career-wise, or hasn't followed a ladder. It's been more of a deliberate and somewhat circumstantial, frankly, in some cases, and I'll talk about that. Um, uh, Sort of movement across sectors. It's been a response to my environment and some of the options that presented themselves, and in other cases were really, really deliberate. So but each layer has, before we dive into the deck, each layer has really added a layer of market value, all of which I'm leveraging now. I mean, I have throughout, but to stand up my own company, which we'll get to, is just a baby right now in infancy stages, but exciting and scary. But all of it's led me to the choice that I made to go out on my own, which I'm currently doing. So I think before moving to the next slide, I think just top lines from this, as I took inventory for myself and to think about this session that I want to leave you with are, I think, the importance of adaptability and leveraging your diverse experiences to create impact and value across your various across various professional contexts as you move along. And that's certainly what I've done. Some of it's been very intentional, like I said, and some of it happenstance, and I'm benefiting from it. So you never know what some of these decisions that you'll make in the coming years will bring. And I'll reflect on some of what I'm even learning now for my decision to go to GW or to go to OMB in the early years. I think that, my perspective has come to really sort of my experience across the sectors and across now 20 plus years of being in policy is that really thriving in today's job market and all along for me has not been defined by sector, but more about my capabilities, adaptability, and my relationships. So I remember being at GW, and I certainly along the course of my like academic stints, the emphasis placed on networking and some of the kind of, oh, I don't want to network, but really like building my professional network over and across all the positions that I've been in, and then maintaining them over time has been invaluable. And so I can give you a little color to some of the ways I've done that with authenticity, not in a forced way, but the way you really kind of almost approach the professional relationships. I've realized, and it takes some time to see this, but it takes work and maintaining those relationships, almost like they're friendships, and you do for your friendships and your personal relationships with authenticity and sort of genuine interest in the individuals, and really offering something to the relationships, not just asking things of them, is really valuable. So we can move to the next slide. So here's a quick overview of the moves I've made and some of the key layers of skills and expertise that I've built. So I began my career in the nonprofit sector in California. I did my undergrad at UC Santa Cruz, and I got only in Santa Cruz or in certain places in the world, I got an undergrad degree in community organizing. And through that process of practicums and internships and relationships, coupled with a real passion for the issues that I came to sort of career with, policy, let's call it, was a passion for the issues. And it led me to a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, my first job, which I was at for a few years in state and local advocacy campaigns. So the decision at that point was very much like passion and issues for me. It was the policy, getting the policy expertise. I ended up moving for my first job from San Francisco, where all my friends were and my life was, to the suburbs, which was, difficult. And, in all of 20 something felt like a really big, almost like smart strategic move, but a big, outside my comfort zone personally and for my experience. But I knew the organization was reputable, and I strategically knew that it was going to be a good for me to gain the community organizing skills, run campaigns, build the internships, like do direct advocacy, or I mean, learning to organize diverse stakeholders. Was all incredibly valuable, and I drew a great deal on that experience. I think the life experience in my time on the Hill. So I find myself over the course of these decisions and positions drawing on different pieces of my career from different sectors and different and various points along the path. So my decision to leave that position and ultimately go to GW for grad school was that I was winning affordable housing campaigns in the Bay Area, but there was no way I was going to afford a house on the wages that I was making for the NGO that I was at. So like that, it was economic. But it was strategic. It was okay, I need a grad degree. And the decision to come to GW in retrospect, like I thought it was strategic. I knew I'd have a lot of exposure, but I didn't like I had been working in state and local venues on policy. I really had like very, very little even situational awareness of what like politically, I was politically engaged on issues that were federal. But the federal government was like a complete mystery to me. So I came to GW, and I knew that I would have exposure that I needed. I didn't know exactly what I was going to get from GW. And the alternative for me was like going to UCLA, like staying in California in a very safe sort of. So that felt like a strategic and a risky decision. But the adventure seemed really cool. So I finished in '08, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, but you look at it on paper and it's like an eternity for I'm sure some of you youngins. But so at that point, I didn't know that OMB even existed before I got to DC, nor did I really know what it did, or that like even until I got there did I know what we really did there. But as I was finishing school, OMB was an option, and I thought, well, that would be wise, strategic. It would give me a ton of exposure that I didn't know. It couldn't hurt to be in the executive, at the top level of the executive branch. But at that time, I was really still sort of passionate about my issues, which were organizing around urban planning, open space protection, affordable housing, economic justice, sort of the field of smart growth. And so I was really sort of, my heart was leaning and had gotten offered a couple of these sort of mayoral urban fellowships, one in DC in particular. And I really wanted to go that way, but made what I thought was a safe decision by going to OMB, which would just be really bolster my resume, give me exposure and experience that I really didn't have. But it didn't feel like following my heart to go to OMB, which was it felt wise at that point. So what I took from OMB was a ton. I mean, I had a boss on the Hill for after OMB that put it kind of funny. He'd gone to OMB as well. He'd worked at OMB as well. Said, OMB is like the the perfect finishing school for the federal government. But really, I mean, I got a ton of exposure to federal policy, the skills of budgeting and the appropriation process, interagency coordination skills, the strategy of the executive branch. I was there after Obama had been elected, but under the Bush-led W administration. So saw that shift of administrations, which was really interesting because OMB considers itself, or at that point, I think, as an institution, a sort of like nonpartisan, not really about having like the expertise to staff the White House to and the executive branch, manage the executive branch. So you've got ongoing sort of year in and year out institutional knowledge that's not about who's in the White House. Certainly got that, but got to see the shift in personalities between administrations, was there in the Obama years, learned a lot about the regulatory process. I just broadened my network and my knowledge base significantly. Um, but I knew I didn't want to stay at OMB forever. And I didn't really I think I was there for almost 6 years, 5.5, something like that. Um, I got also a ton of expertise and skills and knowledge in the health field. I'd come from, like I said, urban planning, sort of local issue, housing, sort of expertise policy wise, but moved into the health space while I was at OMB, into the public health space in particular, which was really exciting and a huge honor. So that at that point, I was thinking, okay, what next? What next? A lot of folks are moving from OMB at that point, maybe still into sort of budget directors positions, et cetera. Um, and during the shutdown of 2013, I hadn't quite figured out how I was going to make the next step yet. I was approached by the Senate Appropriations Committee during the shutdown of 2013 when I was furloughed from OMB, which is until this last year, the longest shutdown. And it, I was offered a position on the Labor Health Education subcommittee, the appropriations subcommittee, and they needed it like filled quickly. And so they targeted me because I'd been working in public health at OMB, so I had the technical skills. Um, but they also, ironically enough, I mean, it was Senator Harkin at that point, who was the chair, so it was the Dems up on the Hill, and Senator Mikulski, both of whom have retired since. Looked at my resume and looked at my community organizing on economic justice issues in California and thought, okay, we need somebody quickly. They've got the technical expertise, but based on her resume, we kind of want to talk to her because her politics might lean our direction. So I never imagined I would go to Capitol Hill, nor that any of my sort of California-based work would be useful in DC. But life works in mysterious ways, and it was. That could have been perceived as a really strategic, sort of really exciting. It was an amazing opportunity, but at that point, the 2014 election was looming, and it was pretty clear that the Senate was going to flip from Democratic control to Republican control. So highly likely that, like, within a year of taking the position, I could lose it. But had a heart to heart with myself and what I called kind of that I was forming in those years, my informal Kelly Brown board of directors, people I could consult with to say, like, what do you think about this? What are my, and I've maintained some of those same individuals on my board of directors as I've made my moves, particularly for me, women who are in positions of power who could give me kind of really honest takes on like what they thought. Um, to help me make those decisions. So the Senate was an incredible 10 years. I think, a lot of people will say that that's like the people that have been in those positions say this is, as they retire or leave, like, I'm never going to have a position like this. This has been the greatest honor of my life. This will be the best job I ever had. And I think that's probably true for me. But like skills wise, I think the going from OMB to the Senate was a huge culture shock. It's incredibly flat on Capitol Hill, so the speed by which you have to make decisions, the negotiation skills, the people, the soft skills, the political strategy, were just a remarkable, remarkable experience. I feel like from day to day, you wear a different, from sometimes hour to hour on Capitol Hill, wear a different hat. So sometimes you're playing a lawyer on TV, or sometimes you're paying, like really drew on my GW skills of like hard policy development skills, how to like come up quick, very quickly, not do the rigorous, like mathematical analysis, but be that real consumer of good policy and how to make policy decisions that I had the building blocks of from GW, and the MPP program there. So all of that, learning to, I think, manage up and down. It's incredibly flat. On appropriations, we had very small teams. Um, it's it is being able to read your bosses, your staff directors, or your members of Congress, know what they want to say. Sometimes it's a Senator Murray would turn and say, like, I need, you need a statement in 24 minutes. What we thought was fast at OMB was like, oh, we've got to clear this in 2 days. And on Capitol Hill, it went to like, minutes in some cases. And so all that was really scary in the beginning, but really like showed me how decisions are really made, and how to make tough decisions quickly and trust your instincts, which just came over time. So I'm realizing I'm at 12:20. So not so after 10 years, I left the Hill at a real high point where I loved it, didn't want to leave, but no, I wanted to learn something different and not spend the rest of my career there. Consulted with my board of directors and made a move to Merck and Company, who has a policy shop, and became the director of vaccine policy there. And it was an incredible experience. I learned, I think, a lot more about myself than anything. But I made the decision because I wanted to add more layers of skill and exposure. I wanted to add the private sector. I wanted to see what it was like. I had never had any experience there. I leverage my policy background, particularly on Capitol Hill, but OMB as well. So it was marketable to the private sector who had policy shops, which was exciting, and untested for me, at least. It wasn't like a known thing. So I took a risk knowing that I wanted the exposure and knowing it may not be forever or be the best fit for me. The exposure was incredible. It was like learning an entirely different language that was very like interesting, really challenging, and did not come naturally to me. So I think I grew as an individual. I think I learned that, a lot more about what I didn't want to do and what I did want to do based on trying something new in a way that I didn't, I couldn't have had at the Hill while contemplating things sort of intellectually. Um, and ultimately, I left Merck in the shortest amount of time I've ever occupied a position. It was a year and change that I was there. And I feel like I wouldn't have been capable of that earlier in my career. Like I really only had 3 or 4 jobs in my entire 20 plus career. I'd been staying places for a significant amount of times based on a whole host of circumstances. I felt like at this juncture, at my age and my years of experience, I was like, I don't think this is a great fit for me. And at that point, about a year ago now, decided that I was going to make a life decision and move to be with my partner in New England. So I've been based in DC for 20 years. So it was sort of a decision I'd never, made a decision sort of for life rather than career, and decided that I'd figure out the rest after that. So I'm up in New England, north of Boston, but I'm close to the ocean, which is how I grew up, right? So I kind of made that life affirming decision that wasn't career based, taking a huge risk in starting my own company here, which I'd seen a lot of women in particular, but all kinds of folks in my positions from OMB, but particularly on Capitol Hill, go to start what they call hang out your own shingle and become your own lobbyist. While I was on Capitol Hill, or even, 5 years, 10 years ago, like I would never be a lobbyist in my whole life. I could never see myself doing that. But it took me taking different steps, like getting some private sector exposure, making a decision based to be based where I want to physically be based, but no, I want to work in DC, to wow, look at doing the personal inventory of all the experience and the languages I speak, policy wise, politics wise from Capitol Hill, the relationships I built over the course of this journey, to take a risk to start my own operation and be able to, it's lobbying, it's government relations, but ultimately it kind of ties back to the beginning of my career of being an advocate, being able to like use the skills, expertise, and relationships I have to help organizations that I'm aligned with navigate DC and get policy results. So I think I could keep talking for a while. I might stop there, Melissa and others, and see if there are particular questions. I didn't necessarily pull through the sort of networking, which is huge, and a big piece of what I'm doing now is relying on my network and starting my own company. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions.
Hi, this is Beth McGovern. I'm sorry, I can't see the chat and don't know Zoom very well. Um, I graduated with an MBA from GW and have kind of bounced around, which is why I signed up for this. And most recently worked for USAID contractor. Um, do you, what, I guess my kind of question is, what do you do when your whole network is out of work? Have you ever experienced anything like that? What advice can you give?
Yeah, oof, it's a tough time, and I do so while I'm not in your particular policy field or situation, many of my much of my network is out of work or looking for work or doing something similar to what I'm doing in the health space, or the link between kind of the global health and the domestic health. So I think I've got a little bit of insight. I think. I have friends that are just getting contracts through, private entities to get their jobs back at NIH and grappling with, doing the same job, but losing all the benefits of being a Fed. Others that are have the flexibility of, let's say, health insurance through their partners or are have retired from positions and are have started similar operations to mine. I think my personal experience as I began reaching out to my network, many of whom have are in similar positions to yours, um, was the sensitivity of a coupling of like listening and sharing my positive. I think, this is temporary, meaning we're going to have a recovery phase from this. And how do we position ourselves as advocate and skilled policy experts when what comes next comes and be prepared for that? And how do we bridge the gap between here and there? I think being sensitive to not being tone deaf with various audiences that I'm speaking with as I'm networking to generate business for myself. And sometimes that means I just don't I listen more than I talk. So I think it's a case by case basis. I think in terms of um, friends that I'm seeing successfully navigate this and find work, it is the power of their networks and a little humility in terms of consistently putting yourself out there. And I think rekindling those skills of almost you used at the beginning of their careers, which is hustling. And then I think that I don't, maybe I'll return a question is that like, do you have a network of people? Um, what does your network look like that's going through this same thing, and how are you staying connected and supporting each other for that sort of social emotional bridge until the next opportunities that you all have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, reaching out to people, seeing if they're doing okay.
Yep.
Um, but I do not live in the DC area anymore, so that also has made it kind of interesting. It's more through like family network. Now I'm working for a DoD contractor doing like kind of contract administration stuff, which is like very boring compared to USAID.
Yeah.
So, like, maybe also, like, how do you navigate those skill building jobs that just like don't feed you intellectually or emotionally?
Yeah, I think there's no perfect answer for that. I in my experience when I was feeling similarly remaining focused on the where the role and my time there and my work there fit in the grander strategy. So whether it's economic, it's putting, like it's actually bringing in money or right, whatever it serves economically to support you and your family. Um, Thinking about the frame, whatever value you can derive from that, staying focused on that and thinking about the next thing. And so that these are incredibly challenging times. I feel like the federal landscape has been flipped on its head, and so there is no shortage of people going through it as well. And that is, I'm learning as I go how people are coping and trying to employ some of those myself. I think focused on those slivers of hope. I mean, my first contract, I had 6 months that I kind of launched the business and just started having virtual coffees, going down to DC. That may not be an option for you, but being in person once a month, more or less, to just have coffee with people to support them to continue to maintain the relationships, even if they weren't there was no direct link between the coffee and a potential client for me. And in the end, I think my first client comes through my network and somebody that I worked with were worked in and around at OMB way back in the day. So I think remaining positive and hopeful and continuing to support people in the journey and figure out how to pay the bills in the meantime and putting that energy out there has been really has worked for me thus far, right? Which is that the business of government is still happening, to figure out how to create a living that's both financially sustainable and intellectually and spiritually sustainable as well is it wasn't easy, I think, before the current climate and the current administration, but it is very possible.
And
Thank you.
don't forget you have the alumni network. We have like 3,000 people in our LinkedIn group, and Denise
Mhm.
and I can help anyone identify those folks. Some of them have made this transition. So, Jacob, did you have a question?
Yes.
I did, but I think Kelly answered a good portion of it during that last response. I was just kind of, I mean, I guess I'll reiterate it just in case. But I was kind of curious about, through your network and through your career, what are some of the similarities, if there are any, of people that have helped you get that next job, whether it's their position, how often you interacted with them, any sort of maybe a similar quality between those that may link them.
It's a great question, and I I think that the answer is no. They've come in kind of mysterious and like it almost sort of when I'm developing those relationships that have ended up being fruitful on the back end with jobs or right policy wise, I have not entered into them strategically thinking that I'll get something out of it in the long run. It's sort of been through being an authentic person that cares about, right, like cares about helping. I mean, a lot of my positions have been, whether it be at OMB or in the Senate in particular, is you're dealing with outside stakeholder groups that are asking of you in your position something that you are not um, by your by any sort of definition or parameters of your job obligated to do, right? It's part of the environment where you're cultivating relationships that are not directly influencing your job status, right? That has been where I've had, I think, the most success at building both friends and and time and maintaining those relationships. Um, they've changed over time to become either dear friends or bosses that were just bosses back when, but are now friends now that I'm in a different point in my career. And so even when I don't need something, I'm maintaining those relationships and making sure there are things that I'm offering, whether it's, an old boss at OMB in the course of the first Trump administration, it was a little tough. And now I mean, he's maintained his position there over all these years. And so it was a real hands-off approach. I was on Capitol Hill and we in a position that felt like the front lines of defending against some of the stuff that was coming from the administration, right? It was the oversight and so I was very careful with that relationship in so much as my only interaction with him was about our dogs or the kids and it was slight and subtle. Like I never asked him, like, hey, do you have any intel about when the president's budget is going to come out? Like I could get it somewhere else. And then by, the end of or the beginning of Trump point one, or 2.0, as I'm still on the Hill, it was him actually sharing some of the difficult stuff that he was going through and me making myself available to console and reassure him. So I think being nimble, agile, and really like just your people skills with your professional networks, like treating them like you would want to be treated as a friend or as a family member. It sounds like I feel like a lot more work. Then I don't know. At some point, I realized I'd been putting in that work without being super intentional about it, and then was paying dividends. And then it was like this self-reinforcing sort of cycle. Like it felt good to be a good human being and take care of your people, and so that in general, I think that ethos has paid its dividends back. But over time, there's been no direct linear kind of right. This person or that person has provided the most results for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Reed?
Hi. I had a question. So I feel like my career thus far has been kind of the opposite of yours, Kelly. I feel like I've kind of jumped from place to place, and like my longest I guess stint at an organization had to have been probably like a year and a half. So I guess like for me, I guess I just kind of want to like understand, Kelly, like kind of what your thought process, or kind of like how you approach like the transitions that you've made throughout your career from like, going from one place to another. Just because like I feel like I really would like to stay, like in a place longer than a year, if at all possible.
Maybe, no, I appreciate the question very much. Maybe you could say a couple more words about sort of why you have left, I guess, your positions or moved on, or what has been motivating you in your moves that you could take a look at.
That's a good point. I mean, like it's situational. I mean, I think a lot of it kind of was because like I also got my start doing campaign related work. So a lot of it already was kind of seasonal. Um so I think that kind of helps explain. And then there's also I think I kind of just like went into a lot of my positions just looking to gain exposure and learn about different I guess different areas while I tried to figure out what it was I was really trying to do.
And do you have a sense of, I guess I would counsel you to like if you, based on now your experience, have a sense of where you might like to land and stay for 3 to 5 years, what that generally looks like and how you might move in that direction, whether it's through networks and asking folks for coffees by tapping, like Melissa said, the alumni network, by remaining kind of a student of the process too, right? Like I think we have to be a little bit childlike, or I try to be, even in this move that I've made to do my own thing, which is like there's so much I don't know. So I'm asking people that, maybe would have been considered my juniors while I was in a certain position, like very humbly, like, would you be willing to have coffee with me? Because I have some really stupid questions, and just creating kind of a dialogue with people where if I'm forthcoming about the fact that I would love their help. And, rather than like, hey, could we just have coffee? Because I have some questions for you. Like, I think that there's a lot of creative ways to approach it if you do it with humility and craft a story and think about what it is you want from your next step.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Kelly, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left.
Great.
So I don't know if you would like, if there's other things that you want to talk about, or if we should see if there are other questions.
Happy to go. I don't have, I mean, plenty that we could talk about. Want to make sure that it's relevant to what the group you know, wants or maybe is experiencing. Maybe you have something that you're going through or a challenge, and we can think about it together, whatever the group I think wants.
Okay, so does anybody have a topic that they want to make sure that Kelly covers or want to drill down on anything that she's already said? You can type it in the chat, you can raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself, whatever works for you.
I'd like to hop in. Hey everyone, hey Kelly, I'm Libby. I was MPP class of 2020, so really lucked into the timing there. So I can empathize with graduating into a tough economy out of your master's degree. Um, I also feel like I've had a little bit of a opposite career. I started in the US Senate and am now in an NGO thinking about local, state and local policy and community organizing. And I'm also now considering what it would be like to go back to the state. I went from the federal government to a state government, to this nonprofit, and I'm now thinking about returning to the state. And I'm also taking your advice about relationship building to heart right now. And I'm wondering if how you navigate relationship building and maintaining your network across these different like strata specifically. I think sometimes like I do my DC visits and I like try and set up these coffees, but I don't know if I have a total strategy between like why am I prioritizing having connections on the Hill versus when I think I'm going back, what I would like to go back to the state legislature. So I'm just wondering if you have an organized strategy to think about what relationships you maintain across these different strata of government, and then if you see more people trying to go to the state, what you've been recommending to folks in general, since it's a hard federal hiring environment and states might be a place that people are looking. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question. Um, Quite honestly, I think I began and continue to, I think human nature is gravitate towards maintaining the relationships that I like the most and make sure they're diverse, right? Like it is. Um, so I would say I'm pretty deficient on my California relationships. I thought I would always go back to California. I thought that I mostly had one foot out of DC the entire time that I was there. I think probably the first 15 years. Um, but I was always deficient with that because the members that I either the issues or the members, particularly on the Hill that I was working with, just weren't West Coast. They just happened to fall east, given um, chair and ranking sort of who was occupying the positions on the issues that I was working on. And so I, as one example, ended up rather than forcing, sort of forcing it blindly, it was a very dear friend from GW ended up going back and working for the state government. So I knew I had my, like, that wasn't, what I mean? I knew I had my California state government kind of covered. And then I'd say every 2 to 3 years, when something interesting was happening, even though I'd fallen short on keeping in contact with my NGO contacts from the early days of California, it was the two bosses I loved the most that I wasn't just going to be blindly sort of having coffee with to keep a network. There was this personal substance there to maintain the relationship so that when particular issues or needs that I had or they had came up, they were coming to DC or that it became a friendship. But it took that timing and thought, and a really long runway, I think. Like forcing things never really worked for me. And that's not always those, that's not, you need a job, you need a job, you want to move, the families move. Like there are things that force your hand externally. So I think, that being nimble and creative, as I moved to New England is another example. It was okay, like maybe 3 degrees of separation from the person who used to run the state health department in Maine. Like how would I be sort of triaging it to get back to her, because going to her blindly wouldn't make sense, right? And I still frankly haven't. I think that like I've got a way to get to main institutions and hospitals, but not forcing it, not needing it to happen tomorrow or the following day or even in 2026. I'm thinking long game on certain things. So that's my initial reaction to your question. It is, I think, maybe the short term, long term, right? Like some kind of gradation. And even though you may not feel like you have the luxury of that now, like you will end up, you know what I mean? Like whatever the course is between here and where, the fruits of that labor will come. I think they're worthwhile investments. So I think patience too with like the networking piece. And then I think that the investment in them over time, with some kind of faith that like the universe gives you what you give it, right? Like so there's some kind of that like you put out what you get back, whether it's immediately or long term, has worked for me, but that may be a little woo-woo. In which case, like, right, like the network that GW offers, or the network that the Senate offers, or just keeping relationships alive so they're fun for those individuals. Right, too, is like, what do you add to it? It's like, I'm not asking, like, next week I'll be in DC, and I know like, short term, some of the client that I have now, I will most likely be lobbying on a set of issues that I don't know comfortably, but I know the person that occupies the position. And so, it's not by any means, at least in my heart and my head, it's not malfeasance to go and bring some New England love to the woman that, you know what I mean? Like I kind of know we're friends, but like just know from the halls to say like, here's some Vermont cheese and can we just have coffee? And like, holy shit, this last year was crazy. How did you get through it? Period. You know what I mean? And like be building for like maybe the next time I ask for something. That's very frank. And I saw you put a note, but I didn't catch it.
I think the note was thank you for the answer. So,
Good.
and I'm going to add my thanks. We are at time. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. And Kelly, this is great. These are, by the way, great questions that you're asking and tough questions that don't have crystal clear answers. So, thank you so much, Kelly, for giving us your perspective and also sharing your path with us because it's important for students and alums to embrace the fact that paths go all different kinds of ways. I was a corporate lawyer, so there you go. Lots of different things that you can do. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you, Melissa
Everybody,
and Kelly.
You too. Thank you.
thank you.